Look who's with me now, Marc Short, former legislative affairs director in the first Trump administration, chief of staff to the vice president as well. And with us also, Mick Mulvaney, former Trump White House chief of staff, News Nation contributor. Hello, gentlemen. Thanks for being with us here on this Monday. All right, here's what I saw, Mulvaney. I'm going to start with you. The president posting these letters publicly, one by one by one by one throughout the day to a bunch of nations, but also pushing the deadline back to August 1st. What was the plan here?
I'm not sure there was a plan. I think the plan was simply to not do anything this week. Look, I was watching the markets today. I know you watch those closely as well, Berman, and there was somebody who commented that the markets sort of shrug now and say, look, we don't know what the president's doing. We're not sure what's going to happen, so we're not going to try and guess. Maybe the tariffs will come on August 1st. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll be 25%. Maybe there'll be more. Right. Who knows? It's sort of that cultivated strategic ambiguity that we've talked about in the past. I think the message to the foreign countries is, look, if you haven't started discussions, now is the time. But I'm not sure there's any sort of defined plan here as to what's going to happen in the next 6 weeks.
All right, so the countries, Marc, that he sent to, we could show it real quick, all over the world, but really the two key ones, Japan at 25%, South Korea at 25%. Those two are obviously big-time trading partners. If Mick says, who knows, what say you?
Well, look, I think the reality is that the July 9th deadline is one that is strategically timed to be after getting the one big, beautiful bill done. There's been a lot less conversation lately about trade deals, and I think that a large part of that is because they didn't want to interfere with their domestic agenda. I do have great concerns about the two that you point out in South Korea and Japan, because I think the first administration, there's no doubt that President Trump believes in tariffs. He believes in a protectionist trade policy. But in the first administration, there was a rallying of much of the globe against communist China. These are two of our greatest allies against China that they are now targeting. And so I think that we've turned the page on signing the one big, beautiful bill. I think the president's had a couple of fantastic weeks between what he did in Iran, what he's had a great jobs report. There really hasn't been significant inflation uptick, and you passed the tax bill. But I think you're turning the page now into a very protectionist trade agenda that I think does not portend good things for the second half of the year.
Let me take you both over to the White House real quick, a building you two both know very well, because the Israeli Prime Minister Mick set to arrive there any moment now. I laid out the backdrop, as did Kelly Meyer. What do you expect tonight?
Oh, a lot of sort of congratulatory talk. These two men, to Marc's point, have had a really good couple of weeks. Face it, there's a major turning point in history now of the 21st century where you're now dealing with an Iran that has effectively been neutered. That's a big deal, and you would expect them to have a good bit of conversation about what comes next. I don't think there'll be much trade discussion, to Marc's point. There might be. Right. Trump loves to talk about tariffs with everybody. But generally speaking, I think this is a what comes next conversation after some huge foreign policy successes for both of these leaders.
Marc?
I agree with Mick. I think it has been a couple great weeks. I do think that Netanyahu was probably more anxious to continue the prosecution of the efforts against Iran, and I think the president is looking for more of being able to say he struck some sort of peace deal between them. But having said that, I do think that it's more just a continued relationship building between the two nations.
Mick, give me the thinking of Netanyahu coming over here.
FaceTime with the president counts. I don't care whether or not you're a foreign leader or a staffer in the building or somebody who opens the door. FaceTime with the president of the United States counts, and that goes for every leader or every president in my lifetime. So yeah, if you can have a if you ask to come visit and the president says yes, you take the meeting. Period. End of story.
Any reason why they're not putting this on camera, Mick?
Oh, who says they're not? Listen, there might be a camera appearance. You never can tell, right? I mean,
never know.
Goodness gracious. Right? Exactly.
All right, we'll leave it there. Mick Mulvaney, catch you tomorrow live in person. Thank you, sir. Marc Short hanging around with us tonight here on the Hill. Look at who I have around me today. Crystal is a News Nation contributor. Marc Short is the former chief of staff to Vice President Mike Pence. Yemisi Egbawali is a Democratic strategist. And Sean Spicer, News Nation political contributor. Hello to you all.
Hey, hello.
Thanks for being here. Sean walked in, fired up, so you get to start.
Look, the only way this is going to be successful is if Elon plans on having a lot more children. It's not going anywhere. That's the only way this thing works.
Why not?
He literally has a ton more kids.
Say why. Give me the numbers. Give me the data.
Look, because it doesn't. Wanting a third party is like saying, "Would you like to go to dinner?" And you go, sure, I'd like to go to dinner. Okay, well, where would you like to go? We can't afford this, or here's what we want. And so it's easy to start with that broad concept, right? But at the end of the day, it's about ballot access. It's about candidates. It's about an agenda. And that's where I think a lot of people are going to differ and say, I'd like a third party. Well, would you be more conservative? Would you be more liberal? What issues do you stand for? What's the plan? How do you, all of those things matter. It's like any other business, Blake, where you say, I'd like to build a really successful product. Me too. Go, okay, what does that take?
I first met you in 2015, I believe, out on the trail.
remember.
Yes, I know you remember. Talk to me about infrastructure, though, and actually setting this up.
Well, look, I mean, you've got a ballot access issue, and the two parties make it very difficult for third parties or any independent candidate, for that matter, in many jurisdictions to even get on the ballot. So you got Elon Musk and his money. That's a great start. But then you got to get somebody to run on that line, and you go, okay, what is it that they stand for? And does a person in Connecticut agree to the same principles as the person in Arizona? And what will they do if they get in? And I get what he's trying to do, is to say we want maybe 10, 15 people in the House that become this deciding block. But what are those key principles that they're behind? He's been rallying about the spending and the deficit. Is that the main focus that he wants to get these people on board? Those are called Republicans, or traditionally were. Right? So who are those people? How do they get recruited? Why do they want to stay on? I mean, again, and then why wouldn't they be co-opted? Because how are they going to get a committee? They got to go to one of those two parties if they get elected. It just doesn't.
So you've spent time up on the Hill a lot. You've worked up there. Is it realistic, to Sean's point, to let's just call it, say, a dozen, to get them elected up onto the Hill and really shake things up?
I don't really think it's realistic, because I think this is coming from Elon just having a temper tantrum. If it was coming from a real place where he wanted to see some actual governance and leadership, maybe there would be something there. But I think people are going to see through this. It's not about integrity. He would like us all to worship at the altar of X, and we have thoroughly rejected him from both parties.
I compare it to two cartoons. Number one, Homer. Trust me. Okay. Well, maybe. Homer Simpson famously says in this great episode of The Simpsons, he says, look, Marge, talking to his wife, communism works in theory, which is to Sean's point. That's number one. Cartoon number two is Peanuts. You know the old Peanuts cartoon where Charlie Brown, Lucy's trying to get Charlie Brown to run and kick the football, right? And she's like, come on, Charlie Brown, I won't pull it away this time. And she pulls it away and falls on his head. Right. It happens over and over again. I feel like that about people talking about third parties. I went back, I tried to remember, like, 2000, 2004, 2008, 2012, every single time, every 4 years, some group with some name like, the American Fund or whatever, like some name that you're going to get behind. You're like, oh, this sounds good. We're going to do it. We're going to get ballot access, and then we'll get the candidate. We're going to get the candidate, and we're going to get ballot access. And it never, ever works.
Donald Trump ran for the Reform Party nomination in 2000, and he ended up having quite a lot of political success. I'm not going to disagree with the panel about, I think, Elon's prospects here to get people elected. Having said that, I do think he can serve a very important service if he actually brings attention to $36 trillion in debt. Because, frankly, neither party...
I'm for that. I would love it.
I'm not saying you're against it. I'm simply saying,
one second.
But I do think if he can actually contribute that to the national conversation, that is a helpful
Totally agree with
contribution.
that. Right. 100%.
But aren't words cheap, in a sense? Because there is this national conversation, and I just watched your side of the aisle hike the debt ceiling by $5 trillion.
That's my point, is that neither party is actually dealing with it. And so if he actually is able to contribute to that,
he could doge on his own.
But, yeah, I mean, he's got the resources to make sure it's part of the conversation. I don't think he can get people elected, but if he forces Republicans and Democrats to actually begin to address it, that would be a contribution.
And to that point, like, Ross Perot did force, 92 especially.
19%.
He got 19%, which is the most successful since probably John Anderson in 80 would be my guess, the last independent who got, like, a decent chunk. But even 19%, okay, it's not 50, but he did force some fiscal issues, some business principles. Like, he did shape, to Marc's point, he did shape the conversation. I think I at least, focus on, like, can you win?
Right.
Now, which is baseline for politics. But there is something to be said of, like, if you are the richest man in the world and you decide you really want to care. I mean, Pete Peterson has done some good work on debt stuff, but he's not foundation is not the figure that Elon Musk is. It can be done.
Here's what I look at, Yemisi. Rise of independent voters. again, this is another data point. It was 31% back in 2004. Tick forward 2 decades, it's at 43%. So that middle is. Oh, Sean's shaking his head at me already. I haven't even finished my thought. But there is that middle growing, and I started off the segment showing you all the other folks who said, yeah, I love this in theory.
Is Elon in the middle, though? I don't know where he stands in all of this, and I don't think he's made that very clear where he stands. If he wants to pull Democratic voters, well, that's never going to happen after what he did with Doge. The only thing he can pull from is from the Republican side, and I think that they're pretty much in the camp of Donald Trump.
So I find it fascinating. They're both shaking their head at this concept. This is hold on. This is ex-Biden White House, ex-Trump White House, and you're both in agreement. And I guess that brings the question: did he actually hit on something?
No. So first of all just because you don't want to belong to a political party doesn't mean all independents are not created equal. Right. When you look at the modeling of voters, there are tons of independents that are Democrats that don't want to belong to the Democratic Party that vote straight Democratic all the time, and the same thing on the Republican side. They just don't want to be associated with a political party. So that's the myth, the false myth of independent voters. Number two is, to Marc and Chris's point, I agree. If Elon said, I'm pissed at the spending and the debt, and I'm going to create a movement to highlight how this government is out of touch, inefficient, and ineffective, right, I think he could be unbelievably helpful and powerful in that movement. But saying, I want to start a party and go have a meeting with Andrew Yang isn't exactly what I would
Mark Cuban and Scaramucci.
Right.
That's 4.
All right. I got to leave it there. We can do it all night.
And his kids, and now he's got a caucus.
We'll end it where Sean started it. Thank you.